The Ides of March, a date that drips with betrayal. Imagine the most powerful man in the world adored by the crowds, feared by his peers, walking straight into a room full of men who had already decided he would not walk out alive. Julius Caesar wasn't just a general. He was a living paradox, Rome's savior and its greatest threat, all in one body. He rewrote laws, he bent time itself with a new calendar, and he even put his own face on Rome's coins. He didn't need to wear a crown. He was the crown. But in Rome, power never comes without a price. Behind the marble walls of the Senate, the whispers had turned to steel. Knives waited under togas. And in a city that had sworn never to bow to a king, the question burned. If Caesar could not be stopped, was the Republic already dead? What happened next would shake the ancient world to its core and echo across the entire history of the Roman Empire. Rome in 44 BCE was a city scarred by civil war. The forum bustled as always, merchants called out over baskets of figs and senators' litters swayed through the streets, but the soul of the Republic was hollow. Years of bloodshed between Caesar and Pompey had shattered the old political order. The Senate that had once commanded the Mediterranean now whispered in fear. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon 5 years earlier, it had been the point of no return. The river was shallow, but the symbolism was deep, a Roman general bringing his legion against Rome itself. By 46 BCE, he had defeated Pompey, hunted his rivals to Africa and Spain, and returned to Rome not as a mere consul, but as a ruler in all but name. The Senate made him dictator perpetuo dictator for life, granting him extraordinary power under the veneer of tradition. He used that power like a sculptor uses marble. Caesar reshaped Rome in his own image. He expanded the Senate to 900 members, filling it with allies and provincial elites. He reformed the calendar into the Julian model, making time itself a monument to his rule. He placed his portrait on coins, a privilege once reserved for gods, and accepted the title Father of the Fatherland. In every way that mattered, Caesar had become Rome's axis. And yet, he moved with a careful rhythm. At the Lupercalia festival, Mark Antony offered him a diadem, a symbolic crown, before the cheering crowds. 3 times Caesar refused it, letting the moment stretch. The people roared with delight, but the senators shifted uneasily. Had he just rejected monarchy or advertised that he deserved it? Historians still debate his intent. Some argue Caesar only wanted to be seen as irreplaceable, not crowned, that he performed humility while holding absolute control. Others suggest he truly coveted kingship, but knew the Roman psyche too well to grab it openly. After all, since the expulsion of Tarquin the Proud centuries earlier, the title Rex King had been Rome's ultimate taboo. Modern viewers may find echoes of this in today's politics. Leaders who claim to serve the people, rejecting the appearance of autocracy while pulling every thread of power into their own hands. But beneath the spectacle, cracks were forming. In the Senate's marble halls, loyalty was rotting. Many senators owed their survival to Caesar, but gratitude is a poor defense against fear. What happens, they wondered, if this man who commands armies, coins, and calendars decides the Republic is just a costume he can discard? The first whispers of conspiracy began here, in these tense, candlelit corridors. Caesar's genius was in controlling the story of Rome. The Senate's plot would be in reclaiming it with knives. The forum was alive with color and noise, but in the Senate's marble halls, silence coiled like a waiting serpent. Every polished floor and echoing atrium carried whispers of the same word: Rex, King. On the base of Caesar's statue near the rostra, someone had scrawled that single word in the night. To the crowds in the marketplace, it may have been a joke, a prank by some nameless radical. But to the senators, it was an omen written in stone. 5 centuries of Roman identity had been built on the rejection of kingship, and now the word had returned to haunt them. In private villas and shaded porticos, the conversations grew sharper. Gaius Cassius Longinus, a soldier and senator with a simmering sense of betrayal, was among the first to speak treason. Once loyal to Pompey, he had been spared by Caesar, yet the mercy burned. Marcus Junius Brutus, whose lineage traced back to the man who overthrew Rome's last king, listened in quiet torment. To the people, Brutus was a symbol of republican virtue. To himself, he was a man divided between gratitude and ancestry. Their circle expanded slowly. Decimus Brutus, not to be confused with Marcus, joined the plot, an intimate friend of Caesar, whose loyalty bent under the weight of fear for the Republic's future. Trebonius, Ligarius, Casca, men of varying ambition and principle, took their places in the shadowy ring. They called themselves liberators, evoking the ghosts of their ancestors who had once defended Rome from monarchy. Yet their motives were not all noble. Historians still debate the soul of this conspiracy. Was it a defense of freedom, or a last gasp of aristocratic privilege against a populace who had outmaneuvered them? Some modern scholars argue that the conspirators feared losing status more than liberty, that they mistook Caesar's reforms for tyranny because he had simply outgrown their old games. Meanwhile, Caesar continued to expand his dominion of perception. He was planning a grand campaign against Parthia to avenge Crassus and carve his name into the east. He would leave in the spring. If he departed Rome with his legions, he might never return as a mortal citizen. Victories in Parthia could grant him the aura of Alexander, a conqueror who rewrote maps and history alike. Time, therefore, became the conspirators' most pressing enemy. They debated in secret how and where to strike. The first plan was subtle, a staged ambush on the road. But symbolism mattered in Rome. Killing Caesar in the street would make them murderers. Killing him in the Senate would make them saviors. The Republic itself, embodied in marble and tradition, would seem to deliver the judgment. As the Ides of March drew near, omens whispered through the city like smoke. A soothsayer warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. Strange birds gathered in the forum, and unusual noises at night stirred whispers among the citizens. Romans were a superstitious people, and every shadow seemed to grow a voice. Yet Caesar was no man to cower before fate. He dismissed the warnings, even as his wife Calpurnia dreamt of his statue running with blood. To the conspirators, his confidence was a blessing. To the historians who study him today, it remains a question. Was Caesar reckless in his pride, or simply resigned to a destiny he believed no mortal could escape? Modern viewers might see in this the recurring pattern of power. Leaders who survive countless crises sometimes begin to believe they cannot fall, even when the ground beneath them is already cracking. The Senate's trap was set. The daggers were hidden in the folds of togas. The Curia of Pompey would host the next act of Roman history. In the marble quiet of those halls, liberty would come dressed as betrayal. It began with a coin. On one side, the face of Julius Caesar crowned with laurel, living, breathing, mortal. On the other, the weight of history now bent around a single man. To Romans who had been raised to see kingship as poison, the coin was a whisper. The Republic was no longer theirs. The morning of March 15, 44, BC, the Ides of March dawned cool and pale. Caesar awoke in his residence, likely the Domus Publica, where he lived as Pontifex Maximus, while the city hummed outside his windows, unaware that history was about to change. Inside, the air was heavy with unease. Calpurnia, his wife, had dreamt of his statue running with blood, and the household servants murmured about strange omens in the night. She begged him not to go to the Senate that day. At first, Caesar relented. He sent word that the session would be delayed, but the conspirators panicked. It was Decimus Brutus, ironically one of Caesar's closest friends, who persuaded him to attend. He flattered Caesar's courage and whispered that the Senate might think he was weak if he stayed home. Caesar, who had faced battlefields and storms, could not let superstition or the appearance of fear define him. He changed into his white toga and stepped into history. As he traveled to Pompey's theater, where the Senate temporarily met, the streets of Rome carried no sign of the storm to come. Merchants called out in the forum, children played near the fountains. No crowd followed Caesar as they would for a triumph. It was in some ways the perfect disguise for betrayal. The soothsayer who had warned him before the Lupercalia stood along the route. "Beware the Ides of March," he repeated as Caesar passed. Caesar, perhaps amused, replied, "The Ides have come." "Yes," the man said, "but they have not gone." Inside the Curia of Pompey, tension clung to the marble like smoke. The senators rose as Caesar entered. a ritual gesture of respect that hid the daggers beneath their togas. Historians note a chilling irony. The very hall in which they met was adorned with a statue of Pompey, the man Caesar had defeated in the Civil War. Some later wrote that the old general watched his rival's death from stone. The first moments were cordial. The conspirators circled him like actors moving into place for a final scene. Then Tullius Cimber approached, holding a petition. He tugged at Caesar's toga as if to beg. When Caesar waved him off, Cimber yanked harder, pulling the toga down from his shoulder, the signal. Casca struck first, driving a blade towards Caesar's neck. The dictator twisted away, crying out in shock, "Why, this is violence!" Then the others fell upon him. Steel flashed in the lamplight. In a heartbeat, history shattered. The scene, though often remembered in Shakespeare's verse, was likely chaos, togas flaring, feet scuffing, knives scraping against bone and stone. Caesar tried to fight back, but the circle tightened. Blood stained the white marble, and the air filled with the grunts of men committing what they believed was patriotism. Then came Brutus. Whether out of despair or resignation, Caesar ceased to resist. Ancient writers recorded his final words in different ways. Some said he gasped, "Kai su teknion? You too, child?" Others claim he said nothing, only drawing his toga over his face, seeking dignity in the moment of ruin. He fell at the base of Pompey's statue, his lifeblood mingling with the shadow of his old rival. 23 wounds marked his body, but only 1 or 2 were fatal. It was not the knives that killed him most, it was betrayal. Historians debate whether the assassination was ever truly about the Republic. Did the conspirators strike for freedom, or did they only succeed in proving that Rome could no longer be ruled by its laws, but only by the will of men with swords? Outside, the city did not yet know. The streets were quiet, and in that stillness, the Republic was reborn, or perhaps it had just signed its own death warrant. The daggers dripped with blood, but freedom was nowhere to be found. For a heartbeat, the conspirators stood frozen in the curia, their hands trembling, their togas splattered. They had killed the most powerful man in the Roman world, and now Rome itself seemed to hold its breath. Then panic set in. Casca's voice broke the silence first, urging the others to leave. Marcus Brutus, trying to frame the slaughter as salvation, raised his bloody hands and declared that the Republic was restored. But there were no cheers, no echo of triumph. Only the cold gaze of Pompey's statue above Caesar's fallen body, as if marble itself had judged their deed. They had imagined the forum would erupt in gratitude and that Rome would welcome them as liberators. Instead, the city recoiled. When word spread that Caesar was dead, the people didn't pour into the streets to celebrate. They ran indoors, shops closed, windows shuttered. Rome, the eternal city, suddenly felt like a tomb. The senators who weren't part of the conspiracy fled for their lives. Cicero, though sympathetic to the plot, later wrote of the chilling emptiness in the forum, observing in his letters that fear, not liberty, filled the air that day. The conspirators marched to the Capitoline Hill, raising their bloody daggers as symbols of freedom. But their gesture met only silence. Rome's people had loved Caesar not because they cared for the Senate's ideals, but because he had fed them, given them land, and staged games that thrilled their hearts. The Republic was an idea. Caesar had been bread, spectacle, and hope. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal consul and political partner, seized the moment the conspirators failed to claim. He secured the treasury, calmed the soldiers, and planned his countermove. He did not yet openly declare war, but he understood what the conspirators did not. Power is not restored by killing a man. It shifts, like water finding the lowest point. In the days that followed, the assassins tried to negotiate their own legitimacy. Brutus gave a speech in the forum, invoking the old Roman virtues and claiming the knives had defended liberty. At first, the crowd listened in cautious silence. They were unsettled by the blood, but rage had not yet come. That fire would ignite only after Mark Antony's funeral oration, when grief turned to fury, and Rome itself seemed ready to explode. Then came Caesar's funeral. Mark Antony turned it into a political weapon. He read aloud Caesar's will, revealing generous gifts for the people of Rome. He lifted the dictator's blood-stained toga before the crowd, pointing to the tears of each dagger thrust. Finally, he revealed the wax effigy of Caesar's body, stabbed, mutilated, spinning slowly in the sunlight. For a heartbeat, the forum held its breath. Then it erupted in rage. What the conspirators called liberation now looked like pure treachery. The people rioted. Brutus and Cassius were forced to flee the city, hiding their faces as Rome burned in anger. Caesar in death had won the war for perception he had mastered in life. His killers had freed Rome from one man, only to make it the hostage of chaos. Historians still argue over this turning point. Did the conspirators truly misread the public mood? Or was the Republic already too weak to survive without a single dominant figure? Modern readers may see in this the same pattern repeated across history. Elites remove a leader they fear, only to find the crowd does not share their ideals, and chaos fills the void. The Republic had drawn its last breath in the Curia of Pompey. The next inhale would belong to an empire, built not on law, but on loyalty and myth. And that myth had a name: Caesar. They killed the man, but the myth walked on. In the weeks after the Ides of March, Rome seemed to spin without a center. The conspirators, now calling themselves liberators, fled east, expecting the Republic to rally to their cause. But the streets they left behind whispered a different story. The people had lost their protector, and the Senate had lost its mask. Caesar's death had done what no civil war could. It revealed that the Republic existed more in ritual than in reality. Its laws still stood, but its authority had bled out on the marble floor of Pompey's Curia. The senators who had struck to save it now found themselves exiles, while the memory of the man they killed grew larger than life. Mark Antony moved swiftly to fill the void. With Caesar's will in his hands, he became the guardian of the dictator's legacy. He promised land and wealth to the Roman people, and he weaponized grief as shrewdly as Caesar had wielded legions. When Antony delivered his oration at Caesar's funeral, reading the will, raising the bloodstained toga, and spinning the wax effigy for all to see, he turned public mourning into a storm of vengeance. Citizens rioted, burned the homes of suspected conspirators, and erected a makeshift pyre in the forum, hurling furniture and weapons into the flames. The air smelled of smoke, melted bronze, and something older: the death of a republic. Yet the myth of Caesar was not only forged by rage, it was consecrated by inheritance. In his will, Caesar had adopted his 18-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, who would soon be known as Octavian, and later Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Historians still debate whether this was chance or design. Did Caesar intend for his dynasty to rise from the very moment his blood spilled? Or did his murderers unknowingly plant the seed of monarchy they most feared? The civil wars that followed were brutal and unrelenting. Brutus and Cassius, the self-styled saviors of liberty, would fall on distant battlefields at Philippi, their ideals buried with them. Mark Antony would rise and fall, undone by ambition and his fateful alliance with Cleopatra. And Octavian, patient and calculating, would emerge as the ultimate heir not just to Caesar's name, but to his strategy of power through perception. Modern viewers may find a familiar irony here. The act meant to restore democracy instead accelerated its death. A single moment of violence became the hinge on which an entire world order turned. It is a pattern as old as ambition itself, when fear drives men to kill a ruler, only to make him immortal. In death, Caesar became more than a man. His very name became a title Caesar carried by emperors for centuries, and echoed in distant lands as Kaiser and Tsar. Coins, statues, and histories carried his image long after the Senate's daggers had rusted away. And the Republic he supposedly threatened? It had died trying to kill him. And in the myths we choose to believe about saviors, tyrants, and the thin line that separates the two echoes that still shape the entire history of the Roman Empire. They called him savior, others called him king, and some simply feared how much of themselves they saw in him. So now we ask you, was it patriotism that bled on the Ides of March, or just another empire changing masks? Power doesn't die, it molts. In the silence after Caesar's last breath, Rome discovered that assassinations kill men, but they do not kill what men represent. The conspirators had swung their daggers at a man and struck an idea that was already too large for marble halls to contain. Caesar's ghost walked in the triumphs of Augustus, in the eagles of Rome that would march across continents, and in every leader who understood that people fear kings but worship myths. The Senate's floor was washed clean, but the Republic had been mortally wounded. The empire had already begun without a coronation, without a vote, and without mercy. 2,000 years later, we still see the reflection of Julius Caesar in the corridors of power. The faces change, The titles change, but the pattern does not. So the question lingers. Will history remember the Ides of March as the day Rome was saved, or the day freedom finally bled out beneath the weight of a name?